Thank you very much, Liana. So I'm very pleased to be here as moderator for this very esteemed panel. I was really inspired hearing every single one of the speakers share earlier about their respective fields of interest and expertise, really. We heard earlier Dr. Nair share about the power of the spoken and written word, right? And obviously how it can breach cultural differences, even when he was traveling in Hong Kong, for example, and meeting different people. And then we also heard Dr. Farid, who was sharing about the, I think the fluidity of motion and how that evokes emotions in us. And of course, how the changing cultural norms, mores, also affects how we perceive, dance as an art form, right? And then we heard Dr. Wong earlier, and Dr. Wong shared a lot about the difference between multiculturalism versus interculturalism. And I think, later during the panel as well, we might hear a little bit more about how that is different from assimilation, right? And then last but not least, we heard from our own Anugerah Tunas Warisan recipient, Shaza, who shared a lot about a topic that personally is close to me as well, which is arts philanthropy, right? And how, the different institutions play a big role in helping, institutions that maybe are less visible in society also receive their share of funding, I think. So maybe, I think moderator's privilege here. I think each of you would already know that there is a QR code, and you can scan that QR code to put your questions in it. And because it's such a diverse range of topics, I have no doubt there'll be so many questions on it. But moderator's privilege, I'm going to start with the first question, just get the ball rolling, right? I'm very mindful that in these very esteemed halls, we have got many very youthful participants attending here. So perhaps my first question to all of these panelists would be really this, right? We've heard a lot about the role of corporate institutions. We've heard a lot about the role of civic society. We've also heard a lot about the role of government, right, in promoting the arts, heritage, culture. Now, what about the role of youth in promoting the arts, heritage, and culture? What role can youth play in, helping to perpetrate it for the future? If I could maybe just start with, Dr. Mark, since you started first.
So currently, I teach at SOTA in literary arts. And so I'm definitely in contact with people in this age group. And what I'm heartened by is a continued interest to pursue art. These students in SOTA they could go to other IB schools, but they choose to go to SOTA because they have an interest in an art form, and they really work very hard. At least I know my writers work very hard, and they know that they may not end up becoming famous, but they work because they have an interest and they have a desire to be better. And my job really is to facilitate that ability, to grow that ability, and to give them the tools they need. When I was growing up, I never had that opportunity as a writer. I didn't really have a mentor. I was self-taught. And so I think these students of mine are very, very privileged. And I think by extension, you too here, by being privy to this wealth of information this morning, you are indeed privileged. So yes, what do you do now with that? Find your niche, find your interests, go deep, look for people. We live in such a connected society. It's easy to reach out to people, find groups, but don't be passive. You've got to go out there, and there are like-minded people out there, other youths, other leaders, other mentors who will help you grow.
Thank you very much. And then maybe, I pass it over to Ms. Shaza as well, because I understand you've been running Theatre Ikamatra for really long, but your start in it also stemmed from your schooling days. So maybe if you could share, what you think the role of youth would be.
I actually started at Ikamatra when I was 17 years old, during one of the inter-tertiary competitions that the company had. And then now I'm 33 and still running the company. So yeah. I am so heartened actually by how young people these days feel so feel incredibly empowered to speak their mind when they see injustices. They talk about it, whether on social media or in real life, right? And I feel a lot for that because when I was younger, I felt really scared. It took me a really long time to feel confident to point out things that were happening to me or others. Because I felt that there was very little space for that conversation. And I feel like now conversations are opening up about anything and everything, and it's all because the young people are participating in it. So I think keep on keeping on. That's what I want to say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And then, I know on Slido, so there is this, if I could maybe just check before I go on to the questions, Slido, the other two panelists, Dr. Wong, Dr. Do you have any other thoughts on this, on the role of youths?
I think when I first started pushing for, or at least advocating for an appreciation of what I do, my form, I think I was young. And I felt that I did some mistakes and I was willing to learn from it. And also at the same time, it felt necessary, again, I echo the words of both my other panelists who have shared that it was necessary that we go out to get to know like-minded people. It was through, spending time with other people from other nations, for example, and having had experience living overseas, I had to deal with issues of Islamophobia, issues of Asian hate. And these were things that made me think about, my life being in Singapore and how very privileged I've lived. And it felt necessary then to think about ways in which we could also share very important issues through the art, through my art. So that was definitely something which I felt that youths can do to constantly push boundaries and to speak up when necessary.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Wong, yourself?
Right. I guess I feel compelled to speak from a more Chinese perspective here. I think, if I use the word, the Chinese community in Singapore would, of course, be the more privileged group. So I think the challenge for the youth here may be to think a lot more about the wider community in Singapore. But I don't really think that we should push everything to them, because it's also our duty as adults to educate them, to open their minds. So we need more structures, we need more programs in the education system where they can think about different issues of class, gender, ethnicity. And like I said, I feel that in Singapore, we always tend to segregate our subjects. Like we have Chinese studies in the university, along with Malay studies, South Asian studies, and so on. And there's no intercultural studies. Of course, we can park that under cultural studies, but that isn't like a compulsory subject by any means. I think we need to think maybe harder on how to incorporate such content in our education system.
Thank you very much. So what I'm hearing is that there could be possibly a relook or review of how the education, youths are educated on understanding intercultural values. And then also I heard the fact that perhaps in Singapore, our youths are already rather privileged, because in being here in these halls, in SOTA, for example, or in LaSalle, I understand you're a lecturer there as well, there are already these opportunities to also engage in the arts and to, experience different forms in which heritage and culture can be perpetrated. I'm going to just move on to a question that has popped up in the Slido. So Dr. Wong, it's good that you're holding on to that mic, because on Slido there is a question about cultural appropriation. So earlier you shared about the brown face incident I think where there was a performance that was put up by an artist, and I think the person had tried to pretend to be a member of the different ethnic group here. So, if you could maybe share a little bit. So the question was, when is cultural appropriation ever okay?
Okay, I think my argument in the entire presentation was that actually I should have also highlighted a different word, which is cultural borrowing, which sounds more positive, right? Because it's like maybe I should consult other fellow panelists. For example, are there not elements in Malay music and dance that have been borrowed from the Chinese or Portuguese, right?
Yes, there are hybrid syncretized versions. For example, the joget is Portuguese, and also zapin is from the Arabs.
Yes. So if you think even further, like Buddhism, for example, is central to the identity of a lot of Chinese, and that of course came from India, but not only the religion itself. There were like traditions in storytelling that came from India. Well, the very popular story of Journey to the West, for example, featured this monkey king. Now, of course, we have in Ramayana, that's so popular in Southeast Asia, this character of Hanuman. Of course, Monkey King wasn't directly like borrowed from the figure of Hanuman, but we can't deny that some of these ideas must have sort of come together with existing folklore in China.
So it's the idea of cultural borrowing as opposed to appropriation.
Yes. So
right?
the issue I think is when, for example, you adopt the costumes of a different ethnicity, and you do it for your own glamour, without respecting the sensibilities, right? For example, there are people who wear images of Hindu deities.
Yep.
I think there was some issues sometime back when they use it for shoes, right?
No, absolutely. I agree with you. And I like that idea of sensitivities, right? Because earlier as well, Dr. Nair talked about this Bukit Kasih, and how at the Bukit Kasih, you've got 5 different houses of prayers, all of which are respectful of the sensitivities of each of the different faiths and cultures. So
and I think also the issue of how one is benefiting from such borrowing without acknowledging. So the example I cited was like Peranakan Nasi Lemak, right? Every time you add a label, Peranakan, and then the price goes up. So yeah, I think I wouldn't blame people for feeling that, what does that really mean, right?
Understand. Thank you. And then maybe, if I could just, I'm looking at time actually, and I'm very mindful that we are a little bit over time. So maybe if I could just wrap up this session with a last question that's also popped up, and I think it's very fitting that it's also a question that Minister had earlier, poetically perhaps, started this session with, which is really this, right? How can we, through all of these different diverse art forms, and our respective areas of appreciation for heritage and culture, whether it's in dance or in the spoken word or in theater or in whatever cultures really, how can we create that common identity to kind of carry us into the future, to carry Singapore into the future? If I could maybe start with yourself, Shaza, and then we go around in circle, okay?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
No worries. So how can we use different art forms, perhaps, to create this common identity, this common Singapore identity, to carry us into the future?
For me, I think theatre and stories in general is about sharing, and art is about sharing for me. And I feel like that is the driving, like it could be used as a transformational and driving force for the sort of changes that we want in the community, in the society, in countries. And I think we need to be able to harness that power with young people as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then if you could just pass the mic. And
Right. I think when we talk about common identity, it's also important to look at the context in which we choose to identify with a particular identity. Hence, it's also important to have a very nuanced understanding of our own histories and where and how we've come to become the people that we are. In knowing that, then do we appreciate better the need for a common identity, and for what Liana also shared again just now about the universality of humanity.
thank you.
Okay, I agree that understanding of our history is very important, because if you look back in history, there was an idea of like maybe creating something that's unique in Singapore's dance, for example. I think back in the days of National Theatre in the 70s. And of course, nothing much came out of it. So we must learn from from what happened in the past, and what we should do is to do wider and deeper historical research, so that we know what has been done before, and not pretend that everything we see today is new, and like 1,000 shows at the theatre a year, and then we forget about them. Right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wong.
Yeah.
I fully agree. It's it's that understanding, isn't it, of lessons learned from the past and then bringing it into the future.
Yes. I also want to say that when we talk about creating a common identity, we must bear in mind that Singapore is also a global city. So we should not create something to exclude others, right? You can't say that, Singlish represents our identity. So if you hear other people who do not speak Singlish, and so, you are a foreigner.
Oh,
right?
absolutely, you're right. And maybe last but not least, Dr. Nair, if you could just pass the mic over, Dr. Wong. Just very quickly now, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, very quickly. I know it's been a really dense morning. When all of us here on stage were growing up, we had textbooks. And everything was contained in the textbook. And you studied from the textbook. You memorized the textbook. Nowadays, students don't have textbooks. The world is your textbook. Knowledge is online. It is almost infinite. It's exponential. It is a challenge. I see that all the time. How do we harness all of that? How do you take all of that knowledge, whether it's in the arts or economy or everything, how do you bring that home into yourself? How do you create an identity that is local and yet global, that sits at the intersection of so many things? I have no answer for you. If you thought I was leading up to some grand revelation, no, I don't have the answer. It is something that, it is very exciting because you figure it out for yourself. We are now in the age of Web3, and that is decentralized economies and knowledge sharing platforms. That is your generation. That is your future. I want to see what you guys do with that.
So I suppose on that very hopeful note about, youths really being the future and then taking the lead on how the Singapore identity of the future will probably look like, I suppose we'll wrap up this particular panel. Thank you very much, everyone. Please join me in thanking them.